There's a phenomenon in evolutionary biology called convergent evolution, which is the process in which an animal takes on the characteristics of another animal, even if they're not related. So here is every time things that aren't crabs evolved into looking like crabs, starting with the hairy stone crab. You might find this tiny frog-looking crab under rocks in Australia, and if it tells you that it's a crab, it's lying. Hairy stone crabs belong to the Anomura infraorder, which is a common theme for many animals on the list, and they evolved crab-like features to hide from predators. Anomura, the order of fake crabs, and Brachyura, the order of true crabs, are sister orders. Based on the oldest Anomura fossil, that of Platycota echina, scientists believe that Brachyura is the older of the two orders, and Anomura developed as an independent order in the late Triassic period about 200 to 237 million years ago. Now, scientists don't precisely know what hairy stone crabs looked like before their evolution, but it's presumed that their bodies were longer and thicker, more similar to a lobster than a crab. They shrunk in size over millions of years to become flatter and shorter, and since they're no wider than an inch, they've become very difficult to spot. When you add the tiny hairs on top of that build, they really do like small stones, which is why many would-be predators can't spot them. This adaptation is similar to what we see with king crabs, which are similar to the hairy stone crabs, but are not actually crabs. In fact, not only are they not crabs, but they evolved from a family of fake crabs that represent themselves as the real ones, hermit crabs. It's believed that these imposters evolved from the Pagarus genus of hermit crabs, which generally looks like this, nothing alike modern king crabs. The biggest difference is obvious at first glance. King crabs do not have shells. Although the idea of a protective shell has its obvious pros, it comes with a few cons. First of all, crabs that carry shells are constantly under the pressure of a heavy object, which greatly affects mobility. Sure, there's some protection from predators, but they're, at the same time, incapable of running away. When crabs come out of their shells, pun intended, they can, all of a sudden, hunt new prey as they're now faster and more agile. Perhaps even more importantly, they can find new microhabitats, such as algae and cobble, which they couldn't access before because of their limitations. Another advantage of growing out of your shell is that the freedom allows you to grow to incredible sizes. The red king crab, for example, has a leg span of up to 5 feet, and it can grow up to 11 inches across the body. The shells you'll see on hermit crabs are the reason behind their oddly asymmetrical bodies, something that we don't see in king crabs. The most asymmetric body part of a king crab is its abdomen. Aside from reaching incredible sizes, the lack of shell-like constraints also makes your body more symmetrical. Hermit crabs, for example, have oddly asymmetrical bodies, which is generally uncommon in the animal kingdom, and it's done with the sole purpose of fitting into a shell. We don't see this in king crabs, as their most asymmetrical body parts are the abdomens, but their claws have an even more obvious asymmetry. They evolved their claws to this size and shape to become more similar to real crabs. On average, the right claw of a king crab is more robust than the left, implying that their form in the gym is terrible and heavily flavors the right claw. This might seem like an evolutionary mistake, but there are actual crabs, such as the fiddler crab, that have the same anomaly. The reason behind this is, of course, sex. Only male fiddler crabs have one claw bigger than the other. Females have 2 claws of the same size, and the purpose of the one larger claw is not only fighting other males, but also attracting females. Now, get this. It's scientifically proven that female fiddler crabs prefer males with bigger claws. King crabs have not only evolved the same claw anatomy as fiddler crabs, they use it for the same purpose, which means that their copycat evolution has gone way past anatomy and transcended into behavioral evolution. Aside from sex, they went a step further and started using their major claw for hunting. And while on the topic of claws, did you know that there is such thing as a dominant claw in crabs? In most crab species, it's a perfect split. 50% of crabs are right-clawed and 50% left-clawed, but fiddler crabs are surprisingly similar to humans, as only 1.4% of males are left-clawed. Hermit crabs, another fake crab species, are the stark opposite. The left claw is usually larger and the right claw is smaller. However, unlike some crab species, they don't use them for displaying their sexual prowess. Instead, they're used for grasping and pinching. The larger left claw is used for defense and to effectively seal off the opening in a properly fitting shell. while the right claw is used in feeding and scooping water up to the crab's mouth parts. Speaking of defense, this is one category in which hermit crabs haven't copied and pasted the features of true crabs, as they don't have a real shell. You see, true crabs have hard shells to protect their abdomens, while hermit crabs still have their soft abdomens, which are still unchanged after millions of years of evolution. To protect themselves, young hermit crabs will find empty seashells, usually shells of sea snails, and add that piece of armor to their inventory, just like you do in a video game. In that sense, they're a bit smaller to humans. As the hermit crab grows larger, it'll have to find larger shells to hide in. According to fossil records, their evolution from a lobster-like ancestor to the species we know today started about 200 to 150 million years ago. And with records of them still using shells dating back about 100 to 66 million years ago, it implies that their eyes are set on never growing a hard shell. While on the topic of eyes, did you know that hermit crabs have evolved crab-like eyes as well? Both hermit crabs and true crabs, such as fiddler crabs that I'll continue to use as an example, have what's known as compound eyes. Their eyes have some of the most complex and, quite frankly, insane physiological optics on the planet. They're essentially formed of hundreds of thousands of tiny light sensors, each with their own lens and cornea. Every single sensor sees a single image, so the crab itself gets a mosaic of repeated pictures. This grants them some incredible capabilities. For one, they can reduce and increase the amount of light that they get if it's too dark or too bright. On top of that, they have a much wider field of view than humans, either seeing in a full 360-degree radius or close to it, and they're capable of focusing on objects incredibly well. For example, some crabs are capable of identifying a person walking 300 feet away, or identifying a bird no larger than 11 inches flying at a height of 65 feet. That's like seeing the license plate of a car half a mile away. As a family, hermit crabs seem to have evolved some crab-like features, but at this point in time, most of them are still somewhat loyal to their old anatomy. King crabs, as a genus of hermit crabs, have decided to claim independence and invest all of their evolutionary points into attaining features of true crabs, which makes them sort of a black sheep of the hermit crab family, but the blackest of all sheep of this family has to be the coconut crab. Coconut crabs are unlike any other crabs, because they've adapted their crab-like features for life on land instead of the ocean. For one, instead of using abandoned shells for protection, they actually harden their abdominal part of their body and develop their own armor. It takes them a while to develop shells on their own though, so young coconut crabs resort to using snail and coconut shells for protection, which is how they got their name. And since they aren't limited by a shell like hermit crabs are, coconut crabs grow to become absolute units, with the largest specimens growing up to about 16 inches in length and weighing up to 9 pounds. Aside from developing a shell, they also evolved to bend their tails beneath their body for protection, similar to how true crabs do this. Growing this large and having your own shell does come with a set of problems though. Getting bigger means that you need a new shell every once in a while. The process of developing new body armor is called molting, and crabs are defenseless while it's happening. To protect themselves, they'll dig a burrow up to 3 feet in length, in which they'll hide as the shell hardens, which can take between 1 and 3 weeks depending on their size. This behavior is very similar to true crabs, which also have to hide when they're developing a new shell. If a predator does somehow get to a coconut crab, it should watch out, as they have possibly the most powerful grip out of all crabs, both true and fake. A coconut crab weighing 9 pounds can grip with a strength of 3,300 newtons, which is similar to the strength of a lion's bite. However, the only predators coconut crabs have to be worried about are humans and other coconut crabs. They're usually not hunted by other animals because their bodies don't provide a lot of calories, their claws are capable of dealing big damage to the would-be predator, and they can also be poisonous.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
This is if they've been feeding on sea mango, which is a very poisonous fruit. The only active predators of coconut crabs are humans, as the animal is considered a delicacy on several islands, but the hunting of these animals is severely limited today. Therefore, the most action their claws see is usually cracking open coconuts for food, as they're omnivorous and mostly feed on fruit. Another fake crab species with large claws is the porcelain crab. Porcelain crabs have fairly large claws in relation to their body size, which they evolved during the late Jurassic epoch about 150 million years ago. Scientists believe that they're relatives of squat lobsters that, over time, evolved to look more and more like crabs. It's still possible, however, to tell them apart, as porcelain crabs only have 3 pairs of legs instead of the crab's standard of 4 pairs, and they have long antennae in front of their eye stalks. One of the reasons behind the evolutionary decision to start developing crab-like features lies in the natural environment of porcelain crabs. To avoid seabed predators, their crab-like body allows them to squeeze into narrow rock crevices and hide among barnacles and mussels, which makes them almost indistinguishable from other life on the rock. In this regard, porcelain crabs are a bit quicker than their cousins, squat lobsters. As their name suggests, squat lobsters are lobsters, but of course that won't stop them from turning into crabs. Squat lobsters are in fact the most active example of carcinization. They're currently in the process of adopting crab-like features, and scientists agree that they're a morphological intermediate between crabs and lobsters, as they have features of both orders. If you take a look at the body of a squat lobster, you'll notice that it still has the body of a lobster. The body is somewhat elongated, and although they're more flattened than most lobsters, they're not completely flattened like most crabs. However, perhaps the most impressive change towards crab-like features is apparent with the loss of lobstering. Lobstering, known scientifically as the charadoid escape reaction, is the instinctive escape reaction found in many marine crustaceans such as lobster and shrimp. The response is very simple, really. When attacked by a predator, the lobster essentially flexes as hard as possible and flies away at a great speed to avoid being eaten. Sometimes lobstering is enough to avoid becoming dinner, but in other instances, the predator still gets to its meal. Squat lobsters, however, have completely lost their lobstering instincts, which is the main evolutionary sign of carcination in this order. There is, however, an even more extreme example of carcination in the form of mole crabs. This fairly young species, which only evolved in the last 40 million years, is also known as sand crab, and it's probably for the exact same reason that you have on your mind right now. They love burrowing into sandy beaches. Now, terrestrial behavior and burrowing is not at all unseen in crabs, but mole crabs aren't real crabs. This is a habit that they share with so-called frog crabs, which is a species of true crabs that they're in no way related to. Both of these species spend most of their time buried in the sand, with only their eyes peeking out, ready to snap unsuspecting prey. The development of these two species is regarded as one of the best examples of parallel evolution in wildlife. Both families have ovoid bodies, which help them burrow, and claws modified specifically for digging into the sand. And although they are almost identical, they belong to completely different orders. This decision to seemingly just become a crab one day may strike you as odd. But what if I told you that there are more examples to this than we may think? This Jurassic species is only known from a few almost 200 million year old fossils found in the United Kingdom, and it was for a long time regarded as the oldest known true crab. However, it is now known as the lobster who simply decided to become a crab one day. Its ancestors were long-tailed decapods, which, in case you don't know, are crustaceans with 10 legs. Its successors, however, were short-tailed crabs. Eocarcinous precursors were in the middle of the carcinization process when they went extinct. They possessed both crab and decapod morphological qualities. Scientists today are still arguing over what this crustacean was exactly, and the lack of existing fossils certainly isn't helping, but its closest relative was most definitely not a crab. First described in 2011, the fossils of this species are about 200 million years old, and they were found in the United Arab Emirates. There they started developing a broad body, unlike the well-known narrow body seen in lobsters, which is why they're not considered to have undergone carcinization to an extent. However, very little is known about these animals, and they showed too few signs of carcinization to be properly classified as true crabs.